Never a dull moment. Never a dull moment with the FAFSA simplification, Peggy. It keeps getting simpler every day.
It's the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah, yeah. So here we are. Yeah, thanks
I,
for the short notice. We're grateful that it's really cool to see how many people kind of were all over this. We put out kind of a little bit of a bat signal, as you know, to kind of all of our stakeholders because this part of it, I think, is everybody's just so kind of tired and beaten down by all these delays and changes and glitches. And this one really matters. This isn't like some of the other ones that are not a big deal. This one's pretty impactful. I think, which makes it even harder when we thought there was light at the end of the tunnel. So our hope is just like, you know what, we have to talk to everybody that we can. This is obviously school counselors is kind of our number one priority in terms of our partners and who we serve, I think, next to parents and families. But we send it out to other stakeholders in this space, right? Other professionals that are working with families through this process that want to get educated and make sure that number one, Peggy largely, she's been, as you all, most of you know, she's been all over all of this from day one, lives it and breathes it, and then translates it in layman terms for us, albeit very fast, right, Peggy? With a fast cadence. I'm going to try to slow you down a little bit today, but kind of takes translate it in such a way, I think, that says, okay, this is what happened, but here's how you can teach it to the folks that you get in front of. I think in such a way that's really digestible. Number one, and number two, well, what can we control, right? Like so many parts of this process, so much of it is out of our control, and we're always doing our best to focus on what are the controllables. And there always are some, and that's kind of where we're going to end tonight. And we had a presentation last night for all our families and students. It was amazing because it was incredibly well attended, and there was this kind of like collective sigh of relief, I think, and just like we got feedback that was I don't know, really nice for us because it was just, kind of we could feel and it was articulated from everybody like, all right, we're okay here, and we are okay. So that's a lot of what we're trying to accomplish today. What I'm going to do, I'm going to share a link now. I'll share it a couple of times. We are doing another presentation for parents, right? So for families, parents and students, right? Next Thursday, the 11th, okay, at 7 Eastern time, similar to what we did last night. I'm sure we'll know even more a week from tomorrow. Please invite your parents, your families to that, because I think we're gonna do the same thing we did last night, which is just kind of chill everybody out, make sure that they understand what they can control right now, what they can't, and kind of what's gonna happen next. So again, I'll remind you of that a few times, but that's a deal.
yeah, so if there's like financial advisors I know on here, IECs, I will send out an email to IECs like I always do. Here's some copy, invite your families. What we're doing today is really geared to professionals. It's not geared to parents. So if there's any parents on here, it might be a little confusing. We don't want to cause more stress. The 11th is what we're doing for you and will really resonate. So
100%. Yeah, and just quickly, I'm Matt Carpenter. We're College Aid Pro. I kind of skipped right. We're kind of too amped up with all this stuff. We've been, going at it for a feverish pace, especially since this announcement that came through on Sunday here. But again, for those of you that are new to us, we consider ourselves to be kind of the North Stars, the shepherds in this process, right? Like, something that we led with and last night and try to embody is that like everybody's like, where do we turn? I can't get in touch with the Department of Education. Nobody picks up the phone. My FAFSA is not going through. I don't know if my award's right. And I think a lot of people feel helpless and just don't know where to turn. And our kind of message is you came to the right place, right? We have answers for you. We have solutions here. So again, we're just trying to be kind of that backstop. And I think so far so good here. And we got the team that can handle it. So without further ado, Peggy's going to take us away here, get you all educated. I'm going to be banging away in the Q&A, right? So please put your questions in the Q&A. We'll get to as many as we
yeah, as opposed to the chat. And yes, I already answered this once, but yes, this will be recorded. You're registered, you're here, you'll get the recording. So, if you need to leave early or something, you will get the recording, so you'll be all set. Okay. All right, let's get this ball rolling. Matt mentioned we are College Aid Pro, and this truly is our mission, what gets us out of bed. And this is all what we're doing today is all part of that. So there we are. So let's dive in here. So as Matt mentioned, on Sunday, Federal Student Aid FSA came out with an announcement, and then they gave a lot more data on it on a further announcement on, what's today? Wednesday? On Monday, on the 1st. So there's 4 key areas that they talked about. Not going to go super deep, but since we're talking to counselors and advisors and IECs on here, I want to go a little deeper than we ever would with parents, just so you understand some of the areas where there's some issues. You can see up here that the government said less than 20% of FAFSAs, which if you do the math, that's a lot of people were affected. I'm guessing it's pretty close to 20%. So about 1 in 5 families could have inaccuracies and could have issues. So it's an important thing for families to understand. So the first category was with amended returns. So what they came out and said, so this is if a family filed an amended return. This is all about 2022, remember, because that's the year for class of 2024. So this FADDX is basically, if you're familiar with this, it's just a new terminology for the data retrieval tool, DRT. This is the direct data exchange. That's what they're calling it. It's a little bit different with contributors and all that fun stuff that we've talked about in the past, but that's what that is. So the DDX transferred if somebody filed an amended return, pulled the AGI and the filing status from the amended return and the rest of it from their original return. Obviously, that's an issue. The fix, which is a little bit weird to me, is that what they're doing is, okay, it's going to all pull from the original return. And there's typically a flag in there, so the college knows an amended return was filed. There will be no flag. So, we're not talking to colleges today, but they are going to get ICER. I forget what it stands for, but it's basically the FAFSA information that goes to the colleges. I think most of them have third parties translate it. Then they go to work on doing these financial aid award packages for the families. So they are not going to know there was an amended return. So that's an important thing for a family to know. Hey, I filed an amended return. Might make sense for me to let the college know because it's going to benefit us. Then and ED, the Department of Ed said, yeah, we think this affected maybe 2% of processed FAFSAs. So that's the first thing they identified. Then they talked about assets. And remember, this is the non-retirement assets. So what they came out and said is that the student contribution from assets was calculated incorrectly, because there's the student part at 20% and then the parents up to 5.64 on the FAFSA. What the government, when I say the department, I'm just talking about ED, the Department of Ed, what they said is they are going to reprocess FAFSAs, and this is kind of a recurring theme. I have this slide at the end here. They're going to reprocess if it's expected to reduce the student's SAI. It's going to help the family get more financial aid. They're going to reprocess those. They're not going to reprocess the other ones. So maybe some of these hold and it was too high. To me, if it didn't pull assets, reprocessing is always going to increase that SAI because now there's assets on the table. So I don't really know where they're going here, but that's how they said that. And the timeline they gave is that this is going to begin. Hopefully it's happening now. It's April 3rd. I have this other thing down, parent assets, because I've personally worked with families already where I backed into the original SAI that they saw on the confirmation when they sent in their FAFSA and what they see on the FAFSA submission summary. And the difference was almost spot on to the parents' non-retirement assets. So I said, hey, you fell in that bucket. So I'm seeing anecdotally that this potentially is happening with parent assets on the latest announcement they made. They exclusively were talking about student assets, but keep that in mind. You might have some clients or families that say, I wasn't asked asset information. They weren't asked it. There's no way that it's been calculated into the SAI, which is a positive because that will keep the SAI lower. But as I'll mention later, we as professionals have to realize this is a 4-year process for these families. So it's great that this year is a certain way that might be better, but what really matters is what is this going to cost me over 4 years? So that's the asset piece. The next thing that they identified was manually entered data. So just as a reminder, most families did not manually enter data. They were not allowed to. It's not like in the past where you could opt out of DRT. That direct data exchange, the DDX, is mandatory unless you fall into an exception bucket. And then the family was prompted to put in adjusted gross income, to put in their taxes. If they weren't prompted, it pulled. And some of the polls, as I've mentioned, are not working correctly. But there was also an issue with families that manually entered the data. The issue here is that the instructions for the families that said, hey, look at this line for taxes paid, put this here, was inconsistent with what's actually pulling in general. So that what's pulling through DDX. So that's an obvious issue. Again, what ED said is we're going to use what the parents / student entered, even though it's inconsistent with the SAI calculation that the rest of the families are doing. So again, if this benefits the family, great. If it doesn't, that's something to keep in mind. Across the board, institutions can always update this. And they made it clear they can, in this instance, in the language, it said they can update it if it benefits the student. So that's the manually entered data. The last error was these education tax credits. And so the issue is that there was this incorrect transfer via the DDX for anybody prior to March 30th. They said this impacts about 15% of FAFSAs, probably because a lot of people didn't have data in these fields to pull. Still 15% is a pretty big number. The fix for this one, the fix is in place supposedly, and ED will reprocess the FAFSAs, but only the ones where it benefits the individual student and their aid eligibility, which they're saying is about 5% of that 15%. So those are the 4 big areas that they have come out and said, okay, these are the most recent errors. But this is actually a quote right from the document that I was reading from. And this is the recurring theme across all these new errors, not like the income protection allowance one from a while ago. The department intends to reprocess FAFSAs when reprocessing is expected to reduce students' SAIs, thereby increasing their financial aid eligibility. Institutions may use their professional judgment, discretion, to decide on a case-by-case basis whether to proceed with the current poll, the current ICER, which is the federal tax information records, or they can request the Department of Ed generate a new ICER for one or more of the FAFSAs. That's a ton of work put on the college's backs, in my opinion. It's a little bit crazy, but it is what it is. I'm not going to do a soapbox on my feelings about how they're handling this because it doesn't really matter, right? What's important is that all of us as professionals understand this and see how we can step in and support families to reduce stress, to increase aid eligibility, just really to help them understand all of this. And as I said earlier, on a 4-year basis. So what does this mean for your family / clients? They need to know if any of these identified issues affect them. If they do, and how might it affect them? They need to have good estimates. This year, it's always been true. You know, Matt makes fun of me. I say, oh, those SAIs are the tip of the iceberg. And I used to have a little iceberg slide, but it truly
Peggy,
is.
I do not make fun of you ever.
Oh yeah, never.
Blasphemy.
But this year, and we've been doing, I've been doing little videos for social media, like parents they can't go through this process and say, what's an SAI? Which we got that question last night with parents of class of 2024. And I'm not criticizing them. There's so much to understand, but they have to have decent estimates of their SAI, or they're just not in the driver's seat with all of this stuff that's going on this year. And then the next piece of that is they need to understand how to appeal if it will benefit them. Why should they be appealing? How should they appeal? Just appealing is always a big part of this, but this year it's much more complicated, and it's a thing anyways, right? That's why last night, bazillions of people are going to work with us because they need our help to do a good appeal, even without all of this craziness. And then, as I said earlier, being a financial planner by background, it makes my skin crawl that the Department of Ed is saying, well, we're going to do this if it benefits students for year one, because what's going to happen is hopefully this is all fixed for the October 1, 2024 FAFSA, right? For these kids' sophomore year. And it could all change if they did it for the benefit of the student, but then it works correctly for years 2, 3, and 4. Parents are going to have no idea. And then all of a sudden they're going to get an award letter for sophomore year and say, why do I have to pay 15,000 more? I can't afford this. And then you're going to have, it's just not going to be good. The good thing about this, I think, is that the colleges, they care about their retention stats because it's tied to rankings and everything else. So I'm sure they're thinking the same way that I am. And so they're going to try and get their head around this because they don't want families leaving because it's not affordable by the third year because the rug was pulled out from under them. So that's a key thing to keep in mind. And that's the kind of stuff that we do all day long with families. So that's, hopefully I didn't go too fast. Did I get at least a B plus on that, Matt? That I didn't go too
B, straight
Okay,
B,
thank you, thank you.
which is pretty good, right? Which is good, right? B's good.
Yeah,
Look,
thank
it's a lot, right? Now, again, I'm going to talk about, I got a bunch of questions. Well, how do we know if our FAFSA was one of the ones that was screwed up? How are we supposed to know what our SAI is if we can't see it, right? Through the FAFSA. I'm going to talk about that in a minute here, but just to spend a minute on some themes, right? In kind of how we're coaching it, for families that we get in front of is, again, this is just another hiccup, right? Another piece of adversity, right? And what we want to do is kind of level set and say, okay, well, how do I find out if my FAFSA was one of the ones that was impacted? The first thing that we want to do is, if we have access, we want to look at what our SAI is, right? So log into our FSA, log into our FAFSA via our FSA ID, see what our students' SAI was, and then fact check that, right? And how we do that, give me a second. I mean, I see a lot of our school partners, school counselor friends are on here, right? So you already have this introduced in your community, right? But at a minimum, and our big call to action for last night, right, for the folks that were in front of us for the first time, we said, look, create your free account, and you can put the you can put this link, if you wouldn't mind, Peggy, and
Yeah, I will.
anybody that wants can share it with their parents. But so long as they fill out their profile, right? And parents or students, they onboard themselves. Usually this is parents, right? And we're going to ask them some questions about their household, some basic questions around their income and non-retirement savings, right? Some other things, but that is going to help us say, here's what your federal SAI should be. Now, to be clear here, this federal SAI, these tables, these are public tables. This is the tables, okay? This is the calculation that the Department of Education uses. Fortunately, ours is not broken, okay? So it is working properly here. So for families that say, hey, my SAI, according to my FAFSA, is $14,500, and we're saying that it should be about $16,000. That's close, right? That's really close. You're in the same ballpark. So that probably tells you that your FAFSA pulled the right information. But we've seen plenty of families where the SAI on their FAFSA is wildly different than this one. That's probably with the information that we have, that's the best thing that we uh, can do to indicate, right, to help indicate to families that they probably were one of these FAFSAs that were negatively impacted. So what we're doing right now with families is saying, go double check your SAI, right? And match that with what you saw in your FAFSA. If they're in the same ballpark, you're probably one of those, 80% of families that were not impacted. So you don't have to worry about getting a later award or a reprocessed award or anything like that. If you are one of the ones that are impacted, there's two things we want you to do. Number one, we want you to contact the colleges that you've applied to and say, hey, we are pretty sure that our FAFSA was one of these ones that got screwed up. Basically, what is there anything, knowing that or having an idea that that is the case, is there anything that we can be doing now to get proactive in terms of getting an idea of what our award would be, right? They might send you to their net price calculator. A lot of colleges aren't very, they're not confident in their net price calculators. And those of you that have followed Peg and I know that, we've done a lot of research on studying net price calculators. On the whole, they're not reliable. That's not universal. There's some that are very good, but those are the outliers. Okay. Those are the exceptions rather than the rule. So another thing that families can be doing right now, another thing that they can control, is have a good idea of, before I get these awards, about how much are these colleges going to cost me, right? This is going to give you a very good indication of what you can expect, right? So I want to start working on my appeal right now, knowing that if I get into Babson, they're going to come back with a net cost for my family at about 46,000. So I want to start my appeal now so that when I actually get that award, I'm sending it to the school on the day I get my award or within 24 hours. And this is really, really important because this is an opportunity, right? Usually adversity breeds opportunity, right? And this is a perfect example because, we have a lot of financial aid counselors that are a part of our team, right? And they have confirmed what our instinct was, and that is, if we get our appeal to these colleges kind of at the front of the line in a really timely fashion, we are more likely to have a successful appeal. We are more likely to get more money because, again, that's the opportunity this year. We're really scared as consumers. This whole thing is really unsettling. And when are we going to get our aid? When are we going to make a decision, right? Of course, these colleges are at least that nervous on the whole, right? They're really nervous about their enrollment. Usually they have, 75% of next year's class solidified by now. They're not even close to that. So they're kind of figuring out, well, how are we going to hit our numbers essentially? So they are going to be extremely motivated when a family appeals to them. Whoever's in that first kind of wave of appeals is very likely to have higher odds of success. So this is the opportunity, right? And this is what you want to be coaching, in your community to your families. Guys, know before the award comes about how much these schools are going to cost you. Get ready to start appealing. So when you get that award, we can be in the front of the line, maximize our odds of getting the best deal. Okay. So that's a lot of what we're preaching right now. And then as these awards do come in, right, this is a really nice part of the technology here. And again, this is all within the free version where a family can upload an award and they can say, I was accepted to Peggy's alma mater, Cornell, right? Star tennis player, and guitarist. Okay.
Yeah, okay. Now you're really going overboard.
So you can upload your financial aid award here. You just got to take a picture of it, whatever it happens to be, save it. And what we do is a couple of things. Number one, translate it. Okay. So this is last year of the 4,000 colleges that we studied, there was 914 different ways that financial award letters were presented. This is taking those 900 ways and putting them into one uniform award letter, right? So we can help families compare apples to apples. We back out things like plus loans, right? Last night, Peg showed an example of UC Davis, and we're picking on UC Davis in that particular example, but they're not alone by any stretch. But they include plus loans as a part of their financial aid award. So a lot of these families think they're getting a full scholarship, right? Because it says balance due $0, but 60,000 of their financial aid was a plus loan, right? So we will back out any plus loans. We won't include that. We want families focused on what's this school going to actually cost you before loans, before work study, And then we can get into the line by line breakdown of need-based versus merit, subsidized versus unsubsidized, et cetera. So again, as these awards come in, we want to help families understand what they're actually going to be expected to pay, and then go to get a good gauge of, did you get a fair award? Did you get a good deal? Did, Babson give you what they said a family that fits your profile should get, right? We're trying to be a kind of a watchdog there and gut check the award as a third party that has this stuff baked into the algorithm, right? So this is where you just want to let the technology do the work. But again, in terms of controlling the controllables, it's, let's see if our FAFSA was one of the ones that was impacted. If we think it was, let's contact those financial aid offices. But either way, let's know right now about how much these schools are likely going to cost us. Get this appeal going, right? Is it going to be a merit appeal? Is it going to be a need-based appeal? Is it going to be both, right? What does that mean? And then so when we actually get that award, we're at the front of the line, and that's going to be a massive competitive advantage this year. So that's what we can't say loud enough and as many times. And again, what we'll spend a lot of time on next Thursday, just like we did last night, is actually walking through the appeal process. We'll do kind of an even more simplified version of what Peg spent the first 15 minutes talking about with these FAFSA changes. We'll do even higher level, focus more on what parents should be doing, what they can control, getting them ready for appeals, and hopefully just kind of bringing down some of the noise and anxiety and just overwhelm that's in so many of these families, for good reason, are dealing with at the time. But Peggy, do you have anything else to add? Anything else that I'm missing? I know you've been banging away in the.
No, I know people, and I probably should have brought this up at the beginning as far as the structure of all of this, as far as because that's the most common question. Well, how do I know if I'm affected? When you submit, when families submitted the FAFSA, the student got the confirmation, and it might have had the SAI if they were lucky. There weren't any glitches. They saw their estimated SAI. Then once it's processed, as Matt said, you log into studentaid.gov. And if it says process, that means it's been sent to the colleges. If it says in review, it hasn't happened yet. I think the government came out a couple of days ago or yesterday and said they're processing. That's going now. There's errors, but it's processing. So most people should see processed. Once that happens, then you can look at that financial aid awards summary. And that's where the official SAI is. So if you see a difference between those two, that's the first tip off that there might be an issue. But then everything else we're sharing should help, play into it as well. That's kind of probably should have said that at the beginning. That's where you see the SAIs in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah, and people have asked about how do you appeal. Send your families to our webinar. I'll go pop that in again too.
Oh, actually, Peg, I sent you the wrong link for that, so let me grab it.
Oh, okay, great. I won't post that one. On April 11th, we're going to be doing how do you appeal? We're actually going to have two of our pros. One is in financial aid at Harvard School of Medicine, but he's been at BC and MIT. And then another woman who used to be at Denison running it, the show. Now she's at Columbus School of Art and Design. And Matt and I are going to ping them with some questions. So it's kind of like behind the scenes kind of people. And then we're going to go into appeals. This is very family focused, so
and
please invite your families.
The other thing I'll add to that, Peg, is that, and this kind of happened last night organically, which is great. And we probably should have, or at least I shouldn't have been as surprised by this, right? But we got so many questions around, I couldn't get my signature on the FAFSA. I couldn't do this. So we did, to the extent that we could, a lot of troubleshooting there to try to help families with some of the workarounds that we found in terms of getting these things across the finish line. Again, just these weird glitches where we've had to go, do these really unique, creative things. We always talk about Jera on our team, who's done so many of these FAFSAs with families, that she's found all these, I don't know, backdoor ways of getting these FAFSAs across the finish line. Yeah, so that link that I just put into the chat, the 41124 is the correct um that is the correct link
Yeah,
to
so
families.
ignore the first one. And for IECs on here, I'll send you some copies so you can easily invite your families. I'm thinking Anne Marie probably does that for the school counselors. And yeah, when you log in and look at a FAFSA summary, the old, SAR, it's not going to show the income data. It didn't last year. Because it's moving directly. It will not show that. So that's not the place where you can't verify it.
Right.
So that just is what it is. Somebody had that in the Q&A, so I'm answering you live on that one, Bill. It's just that's not an error.
Yeah, right.
That's just not going to show up. So
Yeah, but again, and the obviously there's only so much impact we can have with a big group and virtual and all that, but we were able to find some solutions for families last night. So invite those types of families too. And again, we'll have the two financial aid counselors, really veteran folks in the industry on there as well that can help from their perspective and all that. And again, we know they've worked with a ton of families this year getting these FAFSAs across the finish line. So
yeah. So I mean, we're here to help families one-on-one, because some people are saying, well, can we appeal to BC? They didn't qualify, it was ED2. You can always appeal, but if a family, we can look at a family and say, yeah, even with any of the errors, you don't have need-based eligibility. BC really doesn't have merit to speak of. So there's not a lot to do here. Sometimes we can look, not sometimes, we can look and be able to tell that. So the data ports correctly. It's not just being processed correctly. Yeah, Bill, to your maybe, I talked about where the data doesn't move correctly. It sometimes it doesn't pull correctly. You might see some of the errors on the FAFSA submission summary if it's a field that shows up there. Not all fields show up there. And you got to realize this whole FAFSA submission summary is a new format and new. And the other thing we haven't mentioned, which is a whole nother piece, is people need to make corrections. A lot of families, a lot of kids need to add schools. That's through the FAFSA submission summary. It's not available yet. They're saying middle of April. So we're here, first half of April. So hopefully that'll happen soon, because I know there's a lot of people errors after hearing us speak, and they need to go in. But to Matt's point, if they have their account set up, they can see, I'm gonna change it in my profile in my CAP software. Oh, that's my SAI now. Oh, I am gonna have need, so I need to prep my appeal. That's a perfect example of being able to be proactive and start prepping appeals ahead of time, so they're not just relieve stress. And Matt probably said it, but the earlier they can get that appeal in, these colleges, I mean, it's awful for families. It's awful for these FAFSA only schools too, because they're victims to all this craziness as well. And they're thinking about their revenue and staying afloat and getting deposit checks. This is how they're nonprofits, but they're big businesses, right? So this is throwing their whole business model, out of whack as well. So this year more than ever, like everything in life, you have to advocate for yourself. But here, it's on steroids this year, just because of everything that's going on. And it's not advocating and being rude, because that's probably not going to help you. Being from New Jersey, I've had to learn that through the years, that I have to turn down my
New
Jersey
Jersey,
sometimes.
turn down New
But
Jersey, baby.
but it's huge. So, if we can step in and help, we're happy to do that, to help families navigate this. And just the language we just keep saying and using is, you know what, if it gets overwhelming, take a deep breath. Everybody's in the same boat. If you've got CSS profile schools, your families, they're getting award letters. Like, we've appealed off of them. They're getting estimates of the federal aid, because the CSS schools, no, they have more data than the FAFSA is even going to give the colleges, right? So they're backing into it. So it's been a good year for them, because they can be in the forefront. But if your kids, you know, your family's kids have any of those schools, use that data to look at, are they projecting Pell? I mean, I've had ones that project Pell, right? They're projecting subsidized student loans. So that's data to know, hey, what might we expect? And that can help maybe even speak to appeals on the private FAFSA only schools as well.
Yeah, and I see two more quick things here. Somebody's asking about the time. Yeah, it's next Thursday, 4/11 at 7 Eastern time. And I'm writing this and saying it is the appeals webinar for parents and students. Right. And what I'm gonna do, because I know again, this is a lot of our school counselor partners are on here. I know a lot of schools that we partner with currently are on here, which is great. Always love seeing you all. But if you're a high school counselor and we don't partner with your school already, I'm putting my meeting link in the chat there, right? So grab some time, get on my calendar. We can learn what you guys are doing currently and see if we can support you further, you know, in your community. But I popped that in the link as well. If you are a parent or anybody else, don't jump on that link. We will kick you off. But school counselors, go ahead.
Yeah, this link is the recording for parents. Yeah, I don't know. Ellen's sharing something.
But yeah, I don't have anything else, Peggy. I mean, do you have any parting words? I mean, I think you said it pretty well, right? Do your best to keep a level head. We're here to support anybody and everybody, right? So let us be your backstop here and just continue to follow along. Obviously, we have our pulse over all this, and I gotta tell you, Peggy, if this is the last wrinkle in this whole thing, I will be surprised. I think we got another
yeah.
or two ahead of us. So
Yeah, well, not to be not glass half full. I'm really hoping they get all their ducks in a row by October 1 for the class of 2025. So hopefully we'll get all the kinks out and they'll be testing it like mad over the summer. So that will be good to go for the fall. That's the long-term hope on my end at least.
yeah, well, we appreciate everybody tuning in here on short notice. I mean, again, something I say all the time, like we're the tip of the spear collectively here, right? I mean, it's like this isn't to be disparaging to the Department of Education or whomever, but they're just not a resource right now, right? I have families that are trying to get in touch with them and trying to get answers. They're just overwhelmed, right? And they're lucky enough if they can get through to them, if they can get through to somebody. Again, there's only so much training and expertise the folks that are answering those calls have, right? And again, I'm not throwing shade at anybody or an institution, but so that's why we got to be the backstop, right? Us as a group here collectively. So happy to be a part of it. Happy for you guys to be a part of it. And yeah, we'll keep doing it, Peggy. We're not going anywhere.
No, we're not going anywhere. Trying to get some sleep, but we're not going anywhere.
Right. That's right. Thank you,
All
everybody.
right,
Thanks,
everybody.
Peggy.
Well, hopefully this shed a little light and cleared up some questions and enables you to step in and you know where we are. So leverage us if we can support. We're here to do that.
No doubt about it. Thanks, guys.
All right, take care.
Take care.